Welcome to another journey through the quiet corridors of history. Tonight, we explore one of civilization's most enduring and essential services, the postal system, a network that has, for millennia, connected human hearts and minds across vast distances, carrying messages of love, business, and knowledge through mountain passes and across oceans. Our story unfolds slowly, like the gradual establishment of these communication networks themselves. We'll trace the evolution from ancient messenger systems to the intricate postal networks that bound empires together, exploring the lives of those who made it possible: the riders, the postmasters, the clerks who sorted letters by candlelight, and the engineers who calculated the most efficient routes across continents. This is not a tale of dramatic revolution, but rather of patient evolution, the steady accumulation of knowledge about distances, the careful establishment of relay stations, and the quiet dedication of countless individuals who understood that connecting people across space was among humanity's most noble endeavors. So settle in as we begin this gentle exploration of how messages found their way across the ancient world, and how these simple acts of communication gradually wove the fabric that would connect our modern world. In the beginning, there was simply the need to send word from one place to another. Long before the establishment of formal postal systems, ancient civilizations understood that information was as vital as any traded good. The earliest methods were as simple as they were essential: a trusted individual carrying a message, traveling on foot or horseback across the landscape. The ancient world moved at the pace of walking feet and galloping hooves. In Mesopotamia, some 5,000 years ago, clay tablets bore cuneiform messages that traveled along trade routes, carried by merchants who understood that news and commerce went hand in hand. These early couriers moved through a world where a day's journey might cover 20 or 30 miles, where the rhythm of travel was dictated by the rising and setting of the sun, and where the successful delivery of a message was never guaranteed. Egypt developed one of the earliest organized systems, with runners carrying papyrus scrolls along the Nile. The river provided a natural highway, and the pharaoh's messengers learned to work with the current and against it, timing their journeys with the predictable patterns of the river's flow. During the flooding season, when the Nile rose to nourish the land, alternative routes were established along higher ground, creating the first backup systems in postal history. The Persian Empire, under Cyrus the Great, established what many consider the first true postal system around 550 BCE. The Angarium, as it was known, stretched across an empire that spanned from India to Greece. This was not merely a collection of messengers, but a carefully planned network of relay stations, positioned at intervals that matched a day's hard riding. Fresh horses waited at each station, along with provisions and, crucially, fresh riders who knew the local terrain intimately. Herodotus, the Greek historian, marveled at the efficiency of the Persian postal riders, noting that neither snow nor rain, or heat nor gloom of night stayed these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds, words that would echo through postal history for millennia to come. The Persian system was built on the understanding that speed came not from pushing individual horses and riders to their limits, but from the systematic replacement of tired mounts and weary messengers with fresh ones. The stations themselves were carefully positioned, taking advantage of natural water sources, defensible positions, and proximity to existing roads. The Persians understood that a postal system was only as strong as its most vulnerable link, and so they invested heavily in the infrastructure that supported their messengers. Stone buildings housed the station masters, stables sheltered the horses, and granaries stored the food that kept both human and animal messengers fed and ready. Each station was typically managed by a small staff, a station master, who maintained records of messages and riders, stable hands who cared for the horses, and often a smith who could repair tack and shoe horses. These individuals formed the backbone of the system, their quiet competence ensuring that messages could flow reliably across vast distances. The station master's ledger, recording arrivals and departures, became one of the earliest forms of postal documentation. The riders themselves were selected for their endurance, their knowledge of local geography, and their absolute reliability. They carried bronze tokens that served as identification, allowing them to claim fresh horses and provisions at each station. The system worked because it was built on trust that the rider would deliver his messages, trust that the station would provide what was needed, and trust that the entire network would function even when individual components failed. Communication in the ancient Persian system was remarkably sophisticated for its time. Messages were often written on parchment and sealed with wax, but for particularly sensitive communications, a system of coded symbols was used. The most important messages were duplicated and sent by different routes, ensuring that if one copy was lost, delayed, or intercepted, others would still reach their destination. The geography of the Persian Empire presented enormous challenges. Messages had to cross deserts where water was scarce and sandstorms could obliterate roads, mountain passes where snow could block routes for months at a time, and rivers that might be fordable one day and raging torrents the next. The postal system adapted to each environment, with specialized equipment for desert travel, mountain guides who knew the seasonal patterns of high-altitude weather, and river crossings that were carefully maintained and regularly inspected. In China, parallel developments were taking place under the Zhou dynasty. The Chinese postal system, known as Yi, was built around the concept of administrative efficiency. Unlike the Persian system, which primarily served military and imperial communication, the Chinese network from its earliest days carried administrative documents, tax records, and commercial correspondence. The Chinese approach was more bureaucratic, with detailed regulations governing everything from the weight of messages to the treatment of postal horses. Chinese postal stations, called yizhan, were spaced approximately 10 to 15 li apart, roughly 3 to 5 miles, much closer than their Persian counterparts. This reflected the Chinese emphasis on administrative control and regular communication between local officials and the central government. Each station maintained detailed records not just of messages passed through, but of local conditions, weather patterns, and any events that might affect postal service. The Chinese also developed one of the earliest forms of postal inspection, with officials regularly traveling the routes to ensure that stations were properly maintained and that postal regulations were being followed. This bureaucratic approach, while sometimes criticized for its complexity, created a remarkably reliable system that could function even during periods of political upheaval. Both the Persian and Chinese systems recognized that postal service was not merely about carrying messages, but about creating and maintaining the networks that held their empires together. The investment in infrastructure, the training of personnel, and the establishment of regulations all reflected a deep understanding that communication was essential to governance, commerce, and the maintenance of social bonds across vast distances. These ancient systems also established many principles that would remain constant throughout postal history. The importance of relay stations, the need for reliable identification of postal workers, the careful maintenance of routes, and the understanding that postal service required substantial investment in infrastructure. All of these concepts emerged in these earliest organized systems and would be refined and expanded upon by every subsequent postal service. As these ancient networks developed, they created something unprecedented in human history: the expectation that a message could be reliably transmitted across vast distances. This expectation would grow and evolve, eventually becoming the foundation upon which modern communication systems would be built. But in those early days, it was enough that a merchant in Babylon could send word to his agent in Damascus, or that an administrator in Beijing could report to his superiors in Chang'an, securing the knowledge that his message would arrive. The Roman Empire, with its methodical approach to administration and infrastructure, transformed the ancient concept of postal service into something approaching a modern system. The cursus publicus, established by Emperor Augustus around 20 BC, represented perhaps the most sophisticated postal network the ancient world had ever seen. It was a system built not just for speed, but for reliability, coverage, and integration with the broader machinery of imperial governance. The Romans approached postal service with their characteristic attention to engineering and logistics, where earlier systems had often grown organically along trade routes or military paths. The Romans designed their postal network as deliberately as they built their roads, aqueducts, and fortifications. The cursus publicus was conceived as an integral part of Roman administration, as essential to the functioning of the empire as its legions or its tax collectors. The network consisted of two primary services: the cursus velox, the fast post for urgent imperial communications, and the cursus cabularis, the slower service that carried heavier loads and less time-sensitive materials. This distinction recognized that different types of communication had different requirements a military dispatch needed to travel as quickly as possible, while administrative records or supplies could travel more slowly if it meant they could be transported more economically. Roman postal stations, called mansions for overnight stops and mutations for simple horse changes, were positioned with mathematical precision along the empire's extensive road network. A mansio typically appeared every 20 to 30 Roman miles, roughly 18 to 27 modern miles, while mutations were spaced at intervals of 10 to 15 miles. This spacing was carefully calculated based on the endurance of horses and the physical limits of riders, but also took into account terrain, weather patterns, and local security conditions. The construction of these stations followed standardized plans, reflecting Roman efficiency and attention to detail. A typical mansio included stables for 40 to 50 horses, dormitories for postal riders and official travelers, dining facilities, a blacksmith shop for repairs, and administrative offices for the station master and his clerks. The buildings were constructed of local stone when available, but followed empire-wide standards for layout and facilities. Many included baths, reflecting Roman emphasis on hygiene and comfort even in remote outposts. The management of each station required a small but skilled staff. The manceps, or station master, was responsible for the overall operation, maintaining records of riders and messages, ensuring adequate supplies of horses and provisions, and coordinating with neighboring stations. Under him worked strators, the grooms who cared for the horses, carpentari, carpenters who maintained buildings and vehicles, and fabri ferreri, blacksmiths who shod horses and repaired metal fittings. The horses themselves were carefully selected and maintained. Roman postal service used different types of horses for different purposes: light, fast horses for urgent dispatches, sturdy pack horses for heavy loads, and specialized mountain breeds for routes through difficult terrain. Each station maintained detailed records of its horses, tracking their health, performance, and breeding. Sick or injured horses were retired to stud or agricultural service, ensuring that only the fittest animals remained in postal service. Roman postal riders, called tabellari, were a professional class, trained not just in horsemanship but in navigation, basic veterinary care, and the complex regulations governing postal service. They carried bronze diplomas that served as identification and authorization, allowing them to claim fresh horses, provisions, and lodging at postal stations throughout the empire. These diplomas were regularly updated and included detailed information about the bearer's route, cargo, and authority level. The efficiency of the Roman system was legendary. A message from Rome could reach the English Channel in 40 days, traverse the breadth of Gaul in less than a month, or cross the entire Mediterranean basin by a combination of road and sea routes in 6 weeks. These speeds were achieved not through reckless haste, but through the systematic elimination of delays, fresh horses waiting at precisely calculated intervals, stations stocked with provisions, roads maintained in excellent condition, and an administrative system that minimized bureaucratic obstacles. The Romans also developed sophisticated methods for protecting and authenticating postal communications. Important messages were written on specially prepared parchment and sealed with wax impressed with official seals. For the most sensitive communications, a system of coded language was used, with predetermined phrases that conveyed specific meanings. Duplicate copies of crucial messages were often sent by different routes, and the most important dispatches were accompanied by armed escorts. Record-keeping in the Roman postal system was extraordinarily detailed. Station masters maintained logs of every rider who passed through, every message handled, every horse provided, and every meal served to official travelers. These records were regularly copied and forwarded to regional administrators, creating a paper trail that allowed the central government to monitor the efficiency and integrity of postal service throughout the empire. Some of these records have survived, providing modern historians with remarkable insights into the day-to-day operation of the ancient world's most advanced postal system. The integration of the cursus publicus with other Roman institutions was particularly sophisticated. Tax records, legal documents, military dispatches, and commercial correspondence all flowed through the same network, but with different priority levels and handling procedures. The system carried census data from remote provinces, forwarded tax revenues in the form of bills of exchange, and enabled the rapid deployment of legal experts to resolve disputes in distant territories. The Roman postal system also served an important role in cultural integration. Letters between family members separated by imperial service, scholarly correspondence between philosophers and scientists, and literary works shared between authors all traveled the postal roads. The system made possible the intellectual unity of the Roman world, allowing Greek learning to influence Roman thought, Egyptian astronomy to reach British scholars, and Spanish poetry to be read in Syrian academies. Maintenance of the postal network required constant attention and significant resources. Roads needed regular repair, especially after winter freezes and spring floods. Stations required periodic renovation and expansion. Horse herds needed to be replenished and improved through careful breeding programs. The Romans approached these challenges with their typical systematic thoroughness, establishing regular inspection schedules, standardized maintenance procedures, and dedicated funding mechanisms. The financial structure of the cursus publicus was complex but effective. The imperial government provided basic funding for major infrastructure and station construction, but local communities were expected to contribute labor, materials, and ongoing support. This system distributed the cost burden while ensuring local investment in the network's success. Station masters were often local entrepreneurs who contracted with the government to provide postal services, creating a partnership between public purpose and private efficiency. The Roman postal system also established important precedents for international communication. Messages could travel between Rome and its client kingdoms, between Roman provinces and friendly foreign powers, and even, under carefully controlled circumstances, between the Roman Empire and its rivals. These diplomatic channels, managed through the postal system, helped prevent misunderstandings that might lead to unnecessary conflicts. As the Roman Empire evolved, so did its postal system. During the later imperial period, the cursus publicus expanded to include specialized services for different types of cargo and communication. Medical dispatches received priority routing. Commercial correspondence was handled through designated channels, and personal letters, while not officially part of the system, often traveled along postal routes through informal arrangements with station masters and riders. The decline of the Roman Empire ultimately led to the fragmentation of the cursus publicus, but its influence persisted long after the last Roman emperor. The organizational principles, the understanding of infrastructure requirements, and the basic concepts of reliable long-distance communication established by the Romans would influence postal development throughout the medieval period and beyond. The Cursus Publicus demonstrated that systematic communication was not just possible, but essential for the governance of complex societies, a lesson that would be rediscovered and refined by later civilizations. As the Roman Empire fragmented and Europe entered what historians once called the Dark Ages, the sophisticated postal networks of antiquity gave way to more localized, fragmented systems of communication. Yet, from this apparent collapse emerged new forms of postal organization, adapted to the feudal structure of medieval society and the growing importance of trade, religion, and scholarship in binding together the scattered communities of medieval Europe. The medieval period saw the development of several parallel postal systems, each serving different segments of society and operating according to different principles. Monastic networks carried religious correspondence and scholarly works between monasteries scattered across Europe. Royal messengers served the communication needs of emerging nation-states. Merchant guilds developed their own postal services to support growing commercial networks. University systems created scholarly communication networks that connected centers of learning from Oxford to Prague to Bologna. Monastic postal networks emerged as among the most reliable and extensive communication systems of the early medieval period. The great monastic orders Benedictines, Cistercians, Cluniacs maintained far-flung networks of abbeys, priories, and daughter houses that needed regular communication to maintain religious discipline, coordinate agricultural activities, and share theological and practical knowledge. The monastery's commitment to literacy, their economic resources, and their international character made them natural inheritors of Roman postal traditions. A typical monastic postal system operated through a network of brother messengers who traveled predetermined routes between affiliated houses. These monks carried not only official correspondence between abbots and priors, but also books being copied and shared, agricultural reports, accounts of local conditions, and personal letters between religious brothers separated by their assignments. The routes were carefully planned to take advantage of monastic hospitality, ensuring that messengers could find food, shelter, and fresh horses at regular intervals. The timing of monastic postal service was closely tied to the agricultural calendar and religious seasons. During Lent, when travel was restricted, postal service slowed to essential communications only. During harvest time, when monasteries were focused on agricultural work, postal schedules were adjusted to avoid interfering with crucial farm labor. But during the long winter months, when agricultural work was minimal, postal activity often increased, as this was the season when monks had time to write, copy manuscripts, and engage in scholarly correspondence. Royal and noble postal systems developed alongside the emergence of centralized monarchies. As kings and queens sought to extend their authority over increasingly large territories, they needed reliable means of communication with distant provinces, military commanders, and diplomatic representatives. These royal postal systems were often modest affairs compared to the Roman cursus publicus, but they were carefully designed to serve the specific needs of medieval governance. King Louis I of France, in the 15th century, established one of the most sophisticated royal postal systems of the medieval period. His network included relay stations positioned along major roads, with fresh horses and provisions maintained at royal expense. Royal messengers carried silver badges that entitled them to service at these stations, and station masters who failed to provide adequate service faced severe penalties. The system was designed primarily for royal correspondence, but also carried messages for high nobles and important merchants who had purchased royal postal privileges. The English royal postal system developed along similar lines. but with adaptations to English geography and political structure. English royal messengers, known as King's Messengers, travelled established routes between London and major provincial centres. The system made extensive use of England's network of royal castles and manor houses, where messengers could find shelter and fresh horses. During periods of political instability, alternative routes were maintained to ensure that royal communications could continue even if primary roads were blocked or unsafe. Commercial postal networks emerged as European trade expanded during the High Medieval period. Italian merchant families, the Medicis, the Fugars, the Hanseatic lead merchants developed their own postal systems to support their far-flung commercial activities. These merchant postal networks were often more efficient and reliable than royal systems, because commercial success depended directly on the speed and accuracy of communication. The Medici postal system, perhaps the most sophisticated commercial network of the medieval period, stretched from London to Constantinople, with regular service to major commercial centres throughout Europe. Medici messengers carried commercial correspondence, bills of exchange, market reports, and political intelligence that helped the family maintain their commercial advantages. The system was so reliable that other merchants paid fees to have their correspondence carried on Medici postal routes. Medieval postal stations varied greatly depending on who operated them and where they were located. Monastic postal stations were typically simple affairs: a stable for horses, a dormitory for travelling messengers, and a scriptorium where correspondence could be copied or translated. Royal postal stations were more elaborate, often located in castles or royal manor houses, with facilities for entertaining important messengers and space for the administrative staff that managed royal correspondence. Commercial postal stations, particularly those operated by Italian merchant families, were often the most sophisticated. These stations frequently combined postal services with banking, currency exchange, and commercial intelligence gathering. A messenger arriving at a Medici postal station might not only change horses and collect correspondence, but also exchange currencies, obtain letters of credit, and receive updates on market conditions throughout Europe. The messengers themselves were a diverse group, ranging from humble monks carrying letters between nearby monasteries to highly skilled royal couriers entrusted with diplomatic correspondence of international importance. Monastic messengers were typically chosen for their reliability and literacy, rather than their speed, while royal messengers were selected for their ability to travel quickly and safely through potentially dangerous territory. Commercial messengers combined the reliability of monastic couriers with the urgency of royal service, as commercial success often depended on receiving market information before competitors. Medieval postal routes were carefully planned to take advantage of existing road networks, river crossings, and available shelter. The Roman road system, where it still existed, provided the backbone for many medieval postal routes. But as Roman roads fell into disrepair and new political boundaries emerged, postal planners had to develop alternative routes that reflected medieval political and economic realities. River systems played an increasingly important role in medieval postal networks. The Rhine, the Danube, the Thames, and other major European rivers provided relatively fast and reliable transportation for postal messengers, especially during seasons when river travel was practical. Specialized river postal services developed along these waterways, with messenger boats maintaining regular schedules between major river cities. The growth of universities in the medieval period created another type of postal network: scholarly communication systems that connected centers of learning throughout Europe. University messengers carried not only administrative correspondence, but also scholarly works, disputations, and personal letters between professors and students. The University of Paris maintained regular postal contact with Oxford, Bologna, Padua, and other major centers of learning. creating an intellectual network that transcended political boundaries. Medieval postal security was a constant concern, as messengers traveled through territories controlled by different lords, many of whom might be hostile to the message sender. Various solutions were developed to address these challenges. Some messengers traveled in groups for mutual protection. Others carried only coded messages that would be meaningless to casual thieves. The most important correspondence was often sent by multiple routes, ensuring that even if one messenger was robbed or killed, copies of crucial messages would still reach their destinations. The development of postal regulations during the medieval period reflected the growing complexity and importance of communication networks. Monastic rules specified which types of correspondence could be carried by brother messengers and under what circumstances. Royal regulations established the privileges and responsibilities of royal messengers, including their rights to fresh horses and safe passage. Commercial postal services developed detailed contracts specifying delivery schedules, liability for lost messages, and payment arrangements. Medieval postal systems also had to adapt to seasonal variations in travel conditions. Winter weather could make many routes impassable for weeks or months at a time. Spring floods regularly washed out river crossings and turned roads into impassable mud. Summer heat could exhaust horses and messengers alike. Autumn brought harvest season, when agricultural communities were too busy to provide much support for traveling messengers. Successful medieval postal systems developed alternative routes for different seasons, maintained winter shelters at high-altitude stations, and adjusted their schedules to accommodate seasonal variations in travel conditions. The integration of medieval postal systems with other economic and social institutions was less systematic than in the Roman period, but no less important. Postal messengers often served as informal news carriers, bringing information about political developments, military campaigns, natural disasters, and economic conditions to communities that had little other contact with the outside world. In an age before newspapers or regular news services, postal messengers were often the primary source of information about events beyond the local community. By the end of the medieval period, Europe had developed a complex web of postal networks that, while less unified than the Roman system, served the communication needs of a much more diverse society. These medieval systems established important principles that would influence postal development for centuries to come. The importance of adapting postal service to local conditions, the value of multiple competing systems serving different market segments, and the essential role of postal communication in maintaining the commercial, political, and cultural connections that bound together an increasingly complex European civilization. The transition from medieval fragmentation to early modern nation-states brought about a fundamental transformation in postal organization. As monarchs consolidated their power over increasingly large territories, they recognized that effective communication was essential not just for military command and diplomatic relations, but for the basic administration of complex governments. The 16th and 17th centuries witnessed the emergence of truly national postal services, designed not merely to serve royal needs, but to integrate entire kingdoms into coherent administrative and economic units. France led this transformation under the direction of the Bourbon monarchs, particularly Louis XIV, who understood that absolute monarchy required absolute control over information flow. The French postal system that emerged in the 17th century was conceived as an instrument of state power, designed to ensure that royal authority could reach every corner of the kingdom while simultaneously monitoring the communications of potential rivals and troublemakers. The French system was built around the position of Superintendent General des Postes, a High Court official who answered directly to the king and held responsibility for postal operations throughout the realm. Under him served a hierarchy of regional postal directors, local postmasters, and route supervisors, all appointed by royal authority and accountable to the central government. This centralized structure allowed for unprecedented coordination of postal operations, but also created a system that could be used for political surveillance and control. French postal stations, known as relais de poste, were positioned along major roads at intervals calculated to maximize the efficiency of horse changes while maintaining reasonable costs. Each station was required to maintain a minimum number of horses, typically between 6 and 12, along with the facilities necessary to care for them and accommodate postal riders. The stations were operated under royal license by maîtres de poste, local entrepreneurs who contracted with the government to provide postal services in exchange for exclusive rights to change horses for postal riders and official travelers. The standardization of French postal operations extended to every aspect of service. Postal rates were fixed by royal decree and applied uniformly throughout the kingdom. Postal routes were surveyed and marked with stone milestones that indicated distances and directions. Postal schedules were established and published, creating the expectation that mail would move according to predictable timetables, rather than the irregular patterns that had characterized earlier systems. England developed its national postal system along somewhat different lines, reflecting the different constitutional structure of English government. The English system emerged from the medieval royal messenger service, but was gradually expanded to serve broader segments of society. Under Charles I, the position of Postmaster General was established as a crown appointment, but with responsibilities that extended beyond purely royal correspondence to include public postal service. The English Civil War and its aftermath significantly influenced postal development, as both parliamentary and royalist forces recognized the strategic importance of controlling communications. The Commonwealth government under Oliver Cromwell expanded postal service as a means of maintaining administrative control over the country during a period of political instability. The Restoration government of Charles II inherited and further developed this expanded system, recognizing that effective postal service was essential for political stability and economic prosperity. The Great Fire of London in 1666 led to significant innovations in English postal operations. The destruction of much of the city's postal infrastructure forced administrators to develop new methods of mail handling and delivery. Temporary postal facilities were established in surviving buildings, and new routing systems were developed to serve the rebuilt city. These innovations, born of necessity, improved the efficiency of English postal service and were gradually extended throughout the kingdom. German postal development was complicated by the fragmented political structure of the Holy Roman Empire, but the third Taxis family managed to create one of Europe's most extensive postal networks through a combination of imperial privilege and commercial innovation. Beginning in the late 15th century, the family established postal routes connecting the scattered territories of the Habsburg lands, gradually expanding their network to serve much of Central Europe. The third Taxis system was unique in that it combined public service with private enterprise. The family held imperial postal privileges that gave them exclusive rights to carry mail along specified routes, but they operated the system as a commercial enterprise, charging fees for postal services and investing profits in expanding and improving the network. This model proved remarkably successful, as commercial incentives encouraged efficiency while imperial backing provided the authority necessary to establish and maintain routes across multiple political jurisdictions. Spanish postal development was closely tied to the administration of Spain's vast overseas empire. The Spanish system needed to coordinate not only domestic communications within the Iberian Peninsula, but also transatlantic correspondence with Spanish colonies in the Americas and Pacific. This created unique challenges in postal organization, as letters might need to travel overland from Madrid to Seville, by ship from Seville to Veracruz, and then overland again from Veracruz to Mexico City or Lima. The Spanish crown established the Correo de Indias, a special postal administration responsible for communications with the American colonies. This system operated according to rigid schedules dictated by the sailing seasons and the availability of armed escorts for treasure fleets. Letters for the Americas were collected at Seville during specified periods, transported to colonial ports on heavily armed galleons, and then distributed through colonial postal networks that had been established along the lines of Spanish administrative divisions. Dutch postal development reflected the commercial orientation of the Dutch Republic and its emphasis on efficient, practical solutions to administrative challenges. The Dutch system was designed primarily to serve the needs of merchants and traders, with relatively little emphasis on ceremonial or prestige aspects of postal service. Dutch postal routes connected the major commercial centers of the Netherlands with trading partners throughout Europe, creating a network that was particularly efficient for commercial correspondence. The Dutch also pioneered several innovations in postal operations, including standardized postal forms, systematic record-keeping procedures, and regular postal schedules published for public information. These innovations reflected the Dutch emphasis on commercial efficiency and transparency, and many were later adopted by other European postal systems. The emergence of national postal services also brought about significant changes in the social and economic role of postal communication. For the first time, postal service was becoming available to broader segments of society, not just royalty, nobility, and wealthy merchants. This democratization of communication had profound social implications, as it enabled the maintenance of family relationships across greater distances, supported the growth of commercial networks, and facilitated the exchange of ideas and information that would fuel the intellectual developments of the Enlightenment. Postal rates during this period reflected the social hierarchy of early modern Europe. Letters for members of the royal family and high nobility often traveled free of charge, as postal service was considered part of their privileges of rank. Government correspondence was typically carried without charge, as postal service was viewed as an extension of administrative functions. Commercial correspondence was charged standard rates that varied by distance and weight, while personal letters from ordinary citizens carried the highest rates and received the lowest priority. The integration of national postal services with other government functions created new opportunities for administrative efficiency, but also new potential for abuse. Postal administrators were often authorized to open and inspect mail, ostensibly to prevent the transmission of seditious or treasonous materials. This power was used not only for legitimate security purposes, but also for political surveillance and economic espionage. The famous black chambers maintained by various European governments employed cryptographers and linguists to decode intercepted correspondence, creating some of the earliest systematic intelligence services. Technological improvements during this period enhanced the speed and reliability of postal service. Better roads, improved horse breeding, and more efficient coach designs all contributed to faster mail delivery. The development of standardized postal horns allowed postal riders to announce their approach and demand right-of-way on crowded roads. Improved cartography enabled more accurate route planning and more efficient postal operations. The establishment of international postal agreements became increasingly important as national postal services expanded and began to interconnect. Treaties between European powers established procedures for handling international mail, set rates for cross-border postal service, and created mechanisms for resolving disputes between national postal administrations. These early international postal agreements laid the groundwork for the more sophisticated international postal cooperation that would emerge in later centuries. By the end of the 17th century, Europe had developed a network of national postal services that, while still serving primarily elite segments of society, represented a fundamental advance in the organization and reliability of long-distance communication. These systems established organizational principles, operational procedures, and service standards that would influence postal development throughout the modern period. More importantly, they demonstrated that systematic, reliable communication was both possible and essential for the effective governance and economic development of complex societies. The 18th century brought about a revolution in overland transportation that transformed postal service throughout Europe and eventually the world. The development of improved roads, sophisticated coach designs, and systematic coaching networks created the infrastructure for postal service that was faster, more reliable, and more comfortable than anything previously achieved. This was the era of the great coaching routes, the York to London Mail, the Paris to Vienna Imperial Post, the Boston to New York stages that captured the imagination of travelers and established patterns of communication that would persist well into the railway age. The transformation began with road improvements that made regular, scheduled coach service practical for the first time. In England, the Turnpike Acts of the early 18th century authorized the construction of toll roads that were engineered specifically for wheel traffic. These turnpike roads featured improved drainage, more gradual grades, and better surfaces than the ancient tracks they replaced. Similar road improvements were undertaken throughout Europe, often under royal sponsorship, as governments recognized that good roads were essential for effective administration, military mobility, and economic development. French road building under Louis XVI and Louis XVI was particularly systematic, with a corps of trained engineers surveying and constructing routes that connected Paris with provincial capitals and major commercial centers. These routes royales were built to standardized specifications, with uniform widths, carefully calculated grades, and regular maintenance schedules. The engineering principles developed for French royal roads influenced road construction throughout Europe and established standards that would guide highway development for centuries to come. The coaches themselves evolved rapidly during this period, as improved roads made possible vehicles that were larger, more comfortable, and capable of carrying heavier loads at higher speeds. The classic mail coach design that emerged in the mid-18th century represented a careful balance between speed, capacity, and durability. These vehicles were typically pulled by 4 horses, could carry 6 to 8 passengers along with mail and small packages, and were built to withstand the constant use and occasional rough handling that characterized coaching service. Mail coaches were painted in distinctive liveries that identified their routes and operating companies. The famous red and black of the English Royal Mail coaches, the blue and gold of the French Imperial Post, and the green and yellow of the Austrian Postal Service became familiar sights on the roads of 18th century Europe. These color schemes served practical purposes. They made postal vehicles easily recognizable to toll collectors, innkeepers, and other travelers, but they also reflected the growing importance of postal service as a symbol of governmental authority and national identity. The organization of coaching service required unprecedented coordination between multiple service providers. A typical long-distance route might involve dozens of coaching stages, each operated by different proprietors who contracted to provide horses, vehicles, and drivers for their particular segment of the journey. The overall route was coordinated by postal administrators who established schedules, set standards for service, and monitored performance to ensure that mail moved according to published timetables. Coaching inns became crucial nodes in the postal network, serving not only as places where horses could be changed and passengers could rest and eat, but also as information centers where news from different parts of the country was exchanged and disseminated. The great coaching inns of this period, establishments like the George Inn in London, the Golden Lion in York, or the HDLDS posts in Paris, were substantial enterprises that might stable 50 or more horses, employ dozens of ostlers and servants, and accommodate hundreds of travelers in the course of a busy day. The social world of coaching inns was remarkably diverse, bringing together people from different social classes, occupations, and geographical regions in ways that had been rare in earlier periods. Aristocrats traveling in private carriages shared in yards with commercial travelers riding the common stages. Military officers carrying dispatches encountered merchants transporting samples and bills of exchange. Scholars traveling between universities met with government administrators journeying to provincial assignments. This mixing of social groups facilitated the exchange of information, ideas, and cultural influences that helped create a more integrated European society. Mail guards, the armed postal employees who rode the mail coaches and took responsibility for postal security, became iconic figures of the coaching era. These men were carefully selected for their reliability, courage, and familiarity with the routes they traveled. They carried official arms, typically a blunderbuss and pistols, and had the authority to commandeer fresh horses, demand right-of-way on crowded roads, and call upon local authorities for assistance in case of robbery or other difficulties. The daily routine of a mail guard was demanding and often dangerous. He might ride the same route for years, becoming intimately familiar with every inn, every dangerous curve, every potential ambush point along his assigned road. His responsibilities extended far beyond simply protecting the mailbags. He supervised the loading and unloading of mail at each stop, verified the identity of postal riders and messengers, maintained the official timepiece that ensured adherence to postal schedules, and served as the communication link between local postmasters and central postal authorities. The seasonal rhythms of coaching service reflected the agricultural calendar and natural cycles that still governed much of 18th century life. Summer brought the fastest schedules, as long daylight hours and good weather allowed coaches to maintain ambitious timetables. The famous flying coach services of this period with names like the Lightning or the Meteor operated primarily during the summer months, when roads were dry and travel conditions optimal. Winter coaching was a different matter entirely. Shorter days meant that much travel had to be conducted in darkness, using lanterns and torches that provided minimal illumination on unfamiliar roads. Snow and ice could make roads impassable for days at a time, forcing postal services to maintain alternative routes through territories that might add hundreds of miles to a journey. The Christmas season brought both the heaviest mail volumes of the year and the most challenging travel conditions, creating enormous pressures on coaching services. Spring brought its own challenges, as melting snow and seasonal rains could turn even the best-maintained roads into muddy quagmires. The famous mud season in many parts of Europe made regular coaching service impossible for weeks at a time, forcing postal administrators to rely on mounted messengers and pack trains to maintain essential communications. These seasonal variations required postal services to develop flexible operations that could adapt to changing conditions while still maintaining some level of regular service. The economics of coaching service were complex, involving multiple revenue streams and cost centers. Passenger fares provided a significant portion of revenue, but mail contracts from national postal services often represented the stable income that made regular service possible. Coaching companies also carried small packages, provided express delivery services for urgent correspondence, and sometimes operated subsidiary services like local passenger transport or freight hauling. The financial risks of coaching were substantial. A coach that broke down or was robbed could represent a significant financial loss, not just in terms of the vehicle and horses, but in lost revenue and compensation claims from passengers and postal authorities. Weather-related delays could disrupt carefully planned schedules and force expensive alternative arrangements. Competition between coaching companies could drive down rates and reduce profitability, while government regulations often imposed service requirements that might not be economically justified. International coaching routes required particularly complex arrangements, as mail had to cross political boundaries that might be heavily fortified and subject to detailed customs inspections. The Vienna-Paris route, one of the most important international services of the period, required coordination between Austrian, German, and French postal authorities, each with different regulations, currency requirements, and security procedures. Passengers and mail crossing these borders might face delays of hours or even days as documents were examined and customs duties calculated. The impact of coaching service extended far beyond simple mail delivery. Regular coaching schedules created the expectation of predictable, scheduled transportation that would eventually influence railway development. The coaching inns and way stations established during this period often became the nucleus around which new communities developed. The roads built for coaching service provided the infrastructure for commercial development and military movement that would shape European political and economic development for generations. Coaching also contributed to cultural integration across Europe. The exchange of newspapers, books, and magazines through coaching networks meant that ideas and information could spread more rapidly than ever before. Literary works, scientific discoveries, political pamphlets, and commercial intelligence all traveled the coaching routes, creating a more connected and informed European society. The coffee houses and reading rooms that sprang up in major coaching centers became focal points for intellectual and political discussion. The social hierarchy of coaching reflected, but also began to blur the class distinctions of 18th century society. While wealthy passengers could afford to travel inside the coach in relative comfort and protection from weather, less affluent travelers rode outside, on the roof, or clinging to the back and sides of the vehicle. Yet these distinctions were less rigid than traditional social boundaries, as commercial success rather than birth determined who could afford better accommodations. Coaching companies developed increasingly sophisticated methods for managing their operations. Route books recorded distances, travel times, and conditions at each stage. Passenger manifests tracked bookings and payments. Maintenance schedules ensured that coaches and equipment remained in good repair. Financial records tracked revenues and expenses with an attention to detail that reflected the growing commercialization of transportation services. The decline of coaching began even before the railway age, as improving roads made possible faster, lighter vehicles that required fewer horses and could maintain higher average speeds. The development of more efficient coach designs, better horse breeding, and improved route management all contributed to a gradual improvement in service that made coaching competitive with emerging railway services for several decades. But the coaching era had established principles and expectations that would influence transportation development long after the last mail coach had been replaced by railway trains. The concept of scheduled service, the integration of passenger and mail transport, the development of supporting infrastructure, and the expectation of reliable long-distance communication had all become established features of European civilization by the time coaching gave way to railway transport. The great coaching routes had also created a romantic mythology that would influence European literature and popular culture for generations. The adventures of traveling by coach, the camaraderie among passengers, the skill of the drivers, the excitement of racing against time and weather became staples of novels, poems, and popular songs. This romanticization of coaching often obscured the real hardships and dangers of 18th century travel, but it also reflected the genuine excitement and sense of adventure that coaching had brought to the business of communication and transportation. While overland postal networks were developing throughout Europe and North America, the expansion of maritime trade and the establishment of overseas colonies created an equally pressing need for reliable ocean communication. The challenges of maritime postal service were fundamentally different from those of overland mail. Instead of measuring distances in miles and travel times in hours or days, Ocean mail required thinking in terms of thousands of miles and journeys that might take months to complete. Yet, from these challenges emerged postal systems that connected continents and made possible the first truly global communications networks. The earliest maritime postal services grew organically from commercial shipping patterns. Merchants who needed to correspond with trading partners in distant ports naturally sent their letters aboard whatever ships happened to be sailing to the appropriate destinations. This informal system worked reasonably well for commercial correspondence that was not time-sensitive, but it provided no reliability or predictability for urgent communications. Letters might wait weeks or months in port before a suitable vessel became available, and there was no guarantee that any particular letter would ever reach its destination. The Spanish Empire, with its vast American territories and complex administrative requirements, was among the first to establish systematic transatlantic postal service. The Spanish system was built around the annual treasure fleets that carried American silver to Spain and returned to the New World loaded with manufactured goods and administrative correspondence. These fleets sailed according to carefully planned schedules that took into account seasonal weather patterns, the availability of naval escorts, and the complex logistics of assembling cargo and passengers at multiple ports. Spanish colonial mail was collected at designated ports throughout the Americas Veracruz, Cartagena, Portobelo, Lima, and transported to Havana, where it was consolidated aboard the main treasure fleet for the voyage to Seville. The return voyage carried correspondence from Spain to colonial administrators, along with personal letters, commercial documents, and religious materials destined for Spanish communities throughout the New World. This system, while slow and irregular by later standards, provided the basic communication infrastructure that held the Spanish Empire together for more than 3 centuries. The English approach to maritime postal service reflected the more commercial orientation of English overseas expansion. Rather than relying primarily on government-sponsored fleets, the English developed a mixed system that combined official postal vessels with private merchant ships carrying mail under government contract. The English packet service, established in the late 17th century, operated regular sailings between England and various overseas destinations, carrying not only mail but also passengers, small cargo shipments, and government dispatches. English packet boats were typically fast-sailing vessels of 100 to 400 tons, designed specifically for the mail service. They carried smaller crews than merchant vessels of comparable size, since speed rather than cargo capacity was their primary consideration. Packet captains were carefully selected for their navigational skills, reliability, and ability to maintain rigid sailing schedules regardless of weather conditions or commercial opportunities. The packet service operated year-round, even during winter months when most commercial shipping suspended operations. French maritime postal development was closely tied to the expansion of French influence in the Indian Ocean and the Caribbean. The French established regular packet services to their sugar islands in the West Indies, to their trading posts in India, and to their settlements in West Africa. French postal vessels were often heavily armed, as they carried valuable cargo and correspondence through waters where piracy was a constant threat. The French also pioneered the use of neutral ports for mail exchange, establishing postal facilities in places like Malta and the Canary Islands, where French mail could be transferred between different vessels serving various routes. Dutch maritime postal service reflected the global reach of Dutch commercial activities. Dutch mail ships sailed regularly to the East Indies, to Dutch settlements in the Americas, and to trading posts scattered throughout the world. The Dutch East India Company operated what was essentially a private postal service, carrying correspondence between Amsterdam and Batavia, between various Dutch trading posts, and even between European merchants and their agents in Asian ports. This commercial postal network was remarkable for its efficiency and reliability, often outperforming the official postal services of other European powers. The physical challenges of ocean mail service were formidable. Salt air corroded metal fittings and damaged paper documents. High humidity could cause letters to mold or become illegible. Storms could sink ships with their entire mail cargo, and even vessels that survived severe weather might have their mail bags soaked with seawater. Pirates and enemy warships posed constant threats to mail security. The length of ocean voyages meant that letters might be exposed to these hazards for months at a time. Various solutions were developed to address these challenges. Mail bags were often treated with tar or other waterproof substances to protect their contents from moisture. Important correspondence was written on specially prepared paper that could withstand humidity and salt air. Duplicate copies of crucial documents were sent on different ships to reduce the risk of total loss. Some postal services developed coded writing systems that would make intercepted correspondence meaningless to unauthorized readers. The organization of mail handling at major ports required sophisticated logistics and careful coordination. At ports like London, Amsterdam, or Seville, mail for dozens of different destinations might arrive simultaneously aboard returning ships, while outgoing correspondence for equally numerous destinations needed to be sorted and loaded aboard departing vessels. Port postal facilities included warehouses for storing mail bags, offices for postal clerks and administrators, and secure areas for valuable or sensitive correspondence. Colonial postal networks developed to distribute mail from major ports to smaller settlements scattered throughout vast territories. In Spanish America, mail from the annual fleet was distributed through networks of overland routes that connected major colonial cities with remote mining camps, agricultural settlements, and frontier outposts. These colonial postal routes often followed ancient indigenous trade routes, adapted to Spanish administrative needs, and enhanced with European postal techniques. The timing of maritime mail service was dictated by seasonal weather patterns, trade winds, and monsoons. Ships sailing from Europe to the Americas had to time their departures to take advantage of favorable winds and avoid hurricane seasons. Vessels bound for Asia planned their voyages around monsoon patterns that could make the difference between a profitable voyage and a disastrous loss. These natural rhythms imposed rigid constraints on mail schedules that could not be overcome by human planning or technological innovation. Mail security on ocean voyages required special precautions beyond those needed for overland postal service. Ship captains were often required to throw mail bags overboard if capture by enemy vessels seemed imminent, to prevent sensitive correspondence from falling into hostile hands. Special locked containers were developed to protect the most important mail, and postal officials sometimes traveled aboard mail ships to supervise the handling of particularly sensitive correspondence. The social world aboard mail ships was unique, bringing together passengers from different continents and cultures for voyages that might last several months. Colonial administrators returning to Europe traveled alongside merchants seeking new opportunities, military officers taking up new assignments, and missionaries bound for foreign fields. The confined space of a ship and the shared experience of ocean travel created temporary communities that often developed their own customs, entertainments, and social hierarchies. Revolutionary improvements in maritime mail service came with the development of steam navigation in the early 19th century. Steam-powered vessels could maintain more predictable schedules, as they were less dependent on wind and weather conditions. The first regular steamship mail service across the Atlantic was established in the 1830s, reducing the time required for transatlantic correspondence from 4 or 6 weeks to less than 2 weeks. This improvement in speed and reliability transformed international business, diplomacy, and personal communication. The establishment of coaling stations and supply depots throughout the world's oceans was essential for maintaining regular steamship mail service. British naval bases at Gibraltar, Malta, Aden, Bombay, Singapore, and Hong Kong provided the infrastructure necessary for mail steamers traveling to India and the Far East. Similar networks of supply stations supported mail services to other parts of the world, creating a global infrastructure that made reliable international communication possible for the first time in human history. Competition between different steamship lines led to remarkable improvements in mail service during the mid-19th century. The famous race between the Cunard Line and the Collins Line for dominance of the North Atlantic mail service resulted in faster ships, more frequent sailings, and better passenger accommodations. Similar competition on other routes drove innovations in ship design, navigation techniques, and mail handling procedures. The integration of maritime mail with overland postal networks required careful coordination between different transportation systems. Mail arriving in New York aboard a transatlantic steamer needed to be quickly transferred to railway trains for distribution throughout North America. Similarly, mail from the American interior had to be collected and consolidated for shipment to Europe. This integration of different transportation modes established operational principles that would remain important throughout the development of modern communication systems. By the middle of the 19th century, maritime mail service had created the first global communication network in human history. A letter written in London could reach Calcutta in 6 weeks, Sydney in 3 months, or San Francisco in less than a month. These improvements in communication speed had profound effects on international commerce, diplomacy, and cultural exchange, making possible a degree of global integration that had never before existed. The ocean mail services had succeeded in shrinking the world, creating the foundation for the even more rapid communication improvements that would follow with the development of telegraph and cable systems. The advent of railway transportation in the early 19th century brought about the most dramatic transformation in postal service since the establishment of the first organized networks in antiquity. Railways offered unprecedented speed, capacity, and regularity of service, fundamentally altering not just how mail was transported, but how postal systems were organized, how people thought about communication, and how societies functioned on both local and national levels. The railway revolution in postal service represented a quantum leap forward that compressed both space and time in ways that previous generations could hardly have imagined. The first experiments with railway mail transport began almost as soon as the first passenger railways opened for service. The Liverpool and Manchester Railway, which began operations in 1830, was carrying mail within months of its inauguration. These early arrangements were relatively simple. Mail bags were loaded into modified passenger carriages or freight wagons, accompanied by postal clerks who sorted correspondence during the journey. Yet even these rudimentary arrangements demonstrated the tremendous potential of railway transport for postal service. The true revolution came with the development of dedicated railway mail cars and mobile post offices that could sort and process mail while trains were in motion. The first railway post office was established on the London to Birmingham line in 1838, featuring a specially designed carriage equipped with sorting tables, pigeonhole storage systems for organizing mail by destination, and secure storage areas for valuable correspondence. This mobile post office could accomplish in a few hours of travel what had previously required days of stationary work in urban postal facilities. The design of railway mail cars evolved rapidly as postal administrators and railway engineers worked together to optimize these mobile sorting facilities. Later railway post offices featured multiple sorting sections for different classes of mail, hydraulic systems for transferring mail bags between moving trains and stationary platforms, and even small printing presses for producing postal markings and route stamps. The most sophisticated railway mail cars of the late 19th century were essentially complete post offices on wheels, capable of handling every aspect of mail processing except final delivery to individual addresses. The operational challenges of railway mail service required unprecedented coordination between postal and railway systems. Train schedules had to be coordinated with mail collection and delivery times in hundreds of communities along railway lines. Mail bags had to be loaded and unloaded at precise locations and specific times, often while trains were in motion or stopped for only brief periods. Postal clerks working aboard moving trains had to master the complex geography of railway networks and the intricate procedures for sorting mail to dozens or hundreds of different destinations. The most spectacular innovation of the railway mail era was the development of mail exchange systems that allowed trains to pick up and deliver mail without stopping. These systems used mechanical devices, mail cranes, hooks, and nets that could snatch mail bags from trackside installations and deposit outgoing mail bags while trains passed at full speed. The precise timing and mechanical reliability required for these operations represented remarkable achievements in 19th century engineering and logistics. Railway mail clerks became an elite course within postal services, requiring extensive training, exceptional geographical knowledge, and the ability to work efficiently in the cramped, swaying confines of moving railway cars. A railway mail clerk needed to know not just the communities served by his particular route, but also the connections between different railway lines, the schedules of connecting trains, and the most efficient methods for routing mail between distant cities. The best railway mail clerks could sort mail with extraordinary speed and accuracy, even while working by lamplight in cars traveling at high speeds over rough track. The transformation of postal service brought about by railways was most evident in the dramatic improvement in mail delivery times. Before railways, a letter traveling from New York to Chicago might require 2 weeks or more, depending on weather conditions, road quality, and the availability of transportation. With railway service, the same letter could be delivered in 2 or 3 days, and with the development of fast mail trains, overnight delivery became possible between major cities separated by hundreds of miles. The social implications of these improvements in mail service were profound. For the first time in history, regular correspondence over long distances became practical for ordinary citizens, not just wealthy merchants and government officials. Families separated by migration could maintain close relationships through regular letter exchanges. Young people leaving rural communities for opportunities in distant cities could remain connected to their home communities. Commercial relationships could be maintained over much greater distances, contributing to the development of truly national markets for goods and services. Railway mail service also facilitated the rapid distribution of newspapers and periodicals, contributing to the development of national news networks and the emergence of truly national political discussions. A newspaper published in New York in the morning could be distributed throughout much of the northeastern United States by evening of the same day. This acceleration in news distribution had important political implications, as it became possible for the first time for widely scattered populations to respond quickly and in coordination to political developments. The integration of railway mail with existing postal networks required extensive modifications to traditional postal operations. Urban post offices had to be redesigned to handle the large volumes of mail that arrived and departed on railway schedules. New categories of postal employees were needed to coordinate between traditional local postal services and the new railway mail system. Postal rates and classifications had to be revised to take advantage of the economies of scale that railway transport made possible. International railway mail service presented particularly complex challenges, as mail trains had to cross political boundaries that might be heavily regulated and subject to customs inspections. The development of international railway mail agreements required diplomats to negotiate detailed protocols governing everything from customs procedures to currency exchange rates to liability for lost or damaged mail. These international railway mail agreements were among the earliest examples of the kind of detailed international cooperation that would become essential in the modern world. The economic impact of improved railway mail service extended far beyond the postal system itself. Businesses could operate over much larger geographical areas when they could communicate quickly and reliably with distant partners, suppliers, and customers. Financial markets became more integrated as commercial information could travel much more quickly between different trading centers. Agricultural producers could respond more quickly to price changes and market conditions in distant cities. Railway mail service also contributed to the standardization of time throughout different regions. Before railways, each community typically kept local time based on the position of the sun, resulting in hundreds of different local times within a single country. Railway operations required coordinated schedules, leading to the establishment of standard time zones that synchronized clocks across vast geographical areas. This temporal standardization had implications far beyond railway operations, affecting everything from business hours to school schedules to legal proceedings. The safety and security challenges of railway mail service were unprecedented. Mail trains carried large quantities of valuable correspondence, currency, and negotiable instruments, making them attractive targets for robbery. The famous train robberies of the American West often focused on mail cars rather than passenger coaches, as postal shipments were known to contain substantial amounts of cash and valuable securities. Railway postal services developed elaborate security procedures, including armed mail guards, secure storage systems, and coordination with law enforcement agencies. Technical innovations in railway mail service continued throughout the 19th century and into the early 20th century. Electric lighting improved working conditions for mail clerks working night shifts. Improved car designs provided better ventilation and more efficient use of space. Mechanical sorting devices automated some routine aspects of mail processing. Telegraph communication between railway stations allowed for better coordination of mail operations and more efficient resolution of problems that arose during transport. The decline of railway mail service began with the development of highway transportation and aviation, but the system established patterns and expectations that influenced all subsequent developments in postal service. The concept of overnight delivery between distant cities, the integration of transportation and mail processing, the standardization of service across large geographical areas, and the expectation of reliable, predictable mail delivery all emerged from the railway mail era and remained important features of postal service long after the last railway mail car had been retired from service. Railway mail service had demonstrated that dramatic improvements in communication were possible through the systematic application of new technology and organizational innovation. The success of railway mail encouraged postal administrators and inventors to continue seeking even more dramatic improvements in mail service, ultimately leading to the development of airmail, electronic communication, and the global communication networks that connect the modern world. The invention and development of the electric telegraph in the mid-19th century represented perhaps the most revolutionary advance in human communication since the development of writing itself. For the first time in history, messages could be transmitted across vast distances almost instantaneously, fundamentally altering concepts of space, time, and the possibilities for human coordination and cooperation. While the telegraph did not replace traditional postal service, it created an entirely new category of communication that would eventually reshape how societies functioned and how individuals related to the wider world. The theoretical foundations for electric telegraphy had been developing since the late 18th century. The scientists gradually understood the properties of electricity and its potential applications. Early experiments by researchers like Alessandro Volta, Dr. Marie Ampère, and Michael Faraday established the scientific principles that made telegraphy possible, but it required the practical genius of inventors like Samuel Morse, William Cooke, and Charles Wheatstone to transform laboratory curiosities into working communication systems. Samuel Morse's telegraph system, demonstrated successfully in 1844 with the famous message, "What hath God wrought," sent from Washington to Baltimore, established the basic principles that would govern telegraph operations for nearly a century. Morse's system used a simple one-off electrical signal that could be transmitted over long distances using relatively simple equipment. The Morse code that accompanied this system provided a standardized method for converting alphabetical text into the electrical pulses that could be transmitted over telegraph wires. The construction of the first telegraph networks required overcoming enormous technical and logistical challenges. Telegraph wires had to be strung across hundreds of miles of countryside, through forests, over rivers, and across mountain ranges. The electrical properties of long-distance transmission were poorly understood, leading to numerous failures and false starts. Telegraph operators had to be trained not only in the technical aspects of operating the equipment, but also in the precise procedures required for accurate message transmission and reception. The economic and organizational structure of early telegraph companies established patterns that would influence communications development for generations. Telegraph companies were among the first businesses to require substantial capital investments in infrastructure that generated revenue only through service provision rather than product sales. The Western Union Telegraph Company, which emerged as the dominant American telegraph service, pioneered many of the business practices that would later be adopted by telephone companies, broadcasting networks, and modern telecommunications firms. Telegraph offices became focal points of community life in towns and cities throughout the developed world. These facilities, typically located in prominent downtown locations, served not only as places where individuals could send and receive telegrams, but as informal news centers where local residents could learn about events in distant places. Telegraph operators often served as unofficial journalists, sharing news received over the wires with local newspapers and community leaders. The social world of telegraphy developed its own culture, customs, and professional identity. Telegraph operators, both male and female, formed a skilled professional class that took pride in their ability to send and receive messages at high speeds with perfect accuracy. The rhythmic sounds of telegraph keys became familiar background music in business districts throughout the world. Telegraph operators developed their own slang, their own social networks, and even their own forms of entertainment, including contests to see who could transmit messages most quickly and accurately. The integration of telegraph service with traditional postal systems required careful coordination and the development of new categories of communication service. Telegrams were typically much shorter than letters, as customers were charged by the word for telegraph service. This led to the development of a distinctive telegraphic writing style that compressed maximum meaning into minimum words. Telegraph English became a recognized form of communication, with its own grammatical rules and stylistic conventions that influenced business correspondence and even literary expression. International telegraph service presented unprecedented challenges in coordination between different national systems, different technical standards, and different regulatory environments. The laying of the first successful transatlantic telegraph cable in 1866 required international cooperation on a scale that had never before been attempted. The Atlantic Telegraph Company had to coordinate with governments, shipping companies, cable manufacturers, and telegraph operators on both sides of the ocean to achieve what many considered an impossible feat of engineering and logistics. The impact of transatlantic telegraphy on international relations, commerce, and cultural exchange was immediate and profound. For the first time, news could travel between Europe and America in hours rather than weeks. Stock prices, political developments, and cultural events could be shared almost instantaneously between continents. This acceleration in information flow contributed to the development of global markets, international news services, and a new sense of global interconnectedness that would characterize the modern world. The expansion of telegraph networks throughout the world required adaptation to an enormous variety of geographical and climatic conditions. Telegraph lines in tropical regions had to withstand monsoons, humidity, and attacks by insects and animals. Arctic telegraph systems required special equipment and procedures to function in extreme cold. Desert installations needed protection from sandstorms and extreme temperature variations. Mountain telegraph routes required careful engineering to deal with avalanches, rockslides, and severe weather conditions. Military applications of telegraphy transformed warfare and military organization almost immediately. Commanders could communicate directly with distant units, coordinate complex operations across vast geographical areas, and receive real-time intelligence about enemy movements and activities. The American Civil War became the first conflict in which telegraph communication played a crucial role, allowing political leaders to maintain close supervision of military operations and enabling field commanders to coordinate their actions with unprecedented precision. The development of submarine telegraph cables created the first global communication network in human history. By the 1870s, telegraph cables connected Europe with America, Asia, Australia, and Africa, making it possible to send messages around the world in a matter of hours. This global telegraph network required international cooperation on an unprecedented scale, as governments had to negotiate agreements governing cable routes, message handling procedures, and revenue sharing arrangements. Telegraph technology continued to evolve throughout the 19th century, with improvements in transmission speeds, message capacity, and operational efficiency. The development of multiplex systems allowed multiple messages to be transmitted simultaneously over the same wire. Automatic repeaters extended the range of telegraph transmission. Printing telegraphs eliminated the need for operators to transcribe Morse code messages manually. These technical improvements made telegraph service faster, cheaper, and more reliable, encouraging ever wider adoption. The social implications of telegraphy extended far beyond simple improvements in communication speed. The ability to send messages across great distances almost instantaneously began to alter fundamental concepts of space and time that had governed human experience throughout history. Events in distant places could have immediate impacts on local communities. Market fluctuations in one city could instantly affect business conditions thousands of miles away. News of disasters, political developments, or cultural events could spread globally within hours of their occurrence. Telegraph networks also contributed to the standardization of time across large geographical areas. Telegraph time signals, transmitted simultaneously to stations throughout entire regions, made it possible to synchronize clocks with unprecedented precision. This temporal standardization was essential for railway operations, but it also affected countless other aspects of social and economic life that required precise timing and coordination. The cultural impact of telegraphy was reflected in literature, journalism, and popular entertainment of the period. The mysterious, almost magical ability to send messages across vast distances captured public imagination and inspired countless stories, poems, and songs. Telegraph operators became romantic figures in popular culture, portrayed as masters of a mysterious technology that connected the modern world. The telegraph office became a standard setting in popular fiction, representing the connection between local communities and the wider world. Commercial telegraphy established many of the principles and practices that would govern electronic communication for generations to come. The development of standardized message formats, systematic record-keeping procedures, and reliable billing systems all emerged from the practical requirements of telegraph operations. Telegraph companies pioneered customer service practices, technical support systems, and quality control procedures that would later be adopted by other communication industries. The relationship between telegraphy and traditional postal service was complex and evolving. Rather than simply replacing mail service, Telegraphy created new categories of communication that served different purposes and different segments of society. Urgent business communications, news distribution, and emergency messages increasingly used telegraph service, while personal correspondence, detailed business documents, and materials that required physical transportation continued to rely on postal service. This complementary relationship established patterns that would persist through subsequent developments in communication technology. By the end of the 19th century, telegraph networks had created a global communication infrastructure that connected every inhabited continent and most major cities throughout the world. This infrastructure established the foundation for all subsequent developments in electronic communication, from telephone service to radio broadcasting to modern internet systems. More importantly, telegraphy had demonstrated that instant global communication was not only possible but practical, creating expectations and demands that would drive continuing innovation in communication technology throughout the modern period. The late 19th and early 20th centuries witnessed an extraordinary period of innovation and modernization in postal service, as postal administrators sought to cope with rapidly increasing mail volumes, expanding urban populations, and rising public expectations for faster, more reliable service. This era of postal innovation introduced many of the features that would characterize modern postal service, from mechanical mail processing equipment to standardized addressing systems to the systematic study of postal operations and efficiency. The sheer volume of mail being processed by postal systems had grown exponentially with industrialization, urbanization, and improvements in literacy. The United States Postal Service, for example, processed fewer than 100 million pieces of mail annually in 1840, but by 1900 was handling more than 7 billion pieces per year. European postal systems experienced similar explosive growth as expanding commerce, improved transportation, and growing urban populations combined to create unprecedented demands for postal service. Traditional methods of mail processing, which had changed little since medieval times, were clearly inadequate for handling these new volumes. Mail clerks working by hand with simple sorting boxes might process a few hundred pieces of mail per hour, but major urban post offices needed to handle tens of thousands of pieces daily. The solution lay in mechanization and the systematic application of industrial engineering principles to postal operations. The first significant breakthrough came with the development of mechanical mail sorting equipment. Early sorting machines, introduced in the 1890s, used systems of belts, chutes, and bins to assist postal clerks in organizing mail by destination. These machines could handle much larger volumes than manual sorting, while also reducing the physical strain on postal workers and improving accuracy. As the technology developed, sorting machines became increasingly sophisticated, eventually incorporating optical scanning systems that could read addresses and route mail automatically. Pneumatic tube systems represented another important innovation in urban mail processing. First installed in Paris in the 1860s and later adopted in London, New York, and other major cities, pneumatic mail systems used compressed air to propel mail containers through networks of underground tubes. These systems could transport mail across urban areas much faster than surface transportation, and they were particularly valuable for rush deliveries and business correspondence that required immediate attention. The mechanization of mail transportation within postal facilities introduced conveyor systems, mechanical lifts, and automated storage and retrieval equipment that could move mail much more efficiently than manual handling. Large urban post offices began to resemble industrial facilities, with carefully engineered workflows that minimized handling time and reduced the possibility of errors or delays. These improvements in internal processing were essential for managing the huge volumes of mail that flowed through major postal facilities daily. Addressing standardization emerged as a crucial element in postal modernization. As cities grew larger and more complex, traditional addressing systems became inadequate for ensuring reliable mail delivery. The introduction of postal codes, zip codes in the United States, postal codes in Canada, postcodes in the United Kingdom provided systematic methods for organizing addresses that could be processed efficiently by both human workers and mechanical sorting equipment. The development of postal codes required extensive geographical analysis and careful coordination between postal administrations, municipal governments, and other organizations involved in address assignment. Postal engineers had to analyze mail flows, delivery patterns, and transportation networks to design coding systems that would optimize mail processing efficiency. The implementation of postal codes required massive public education campaigns, as millions of individuals and businesses had to learn and adopt the new addressing conventions. Rural mail delivery represented another major innovation of this period, as postal services extended regular delivery service to agricultural areas that had previously relied on infrequent service to central pickup points. The introduction of rural free delivery in the United States in the 1890s required the establishment of thousands of new mail routes, the training of rural mail carriers, and the installation of roadside mailboxes throughout the countryside. Similar rural delivery systems were established in other countries, contributing to the integration of agricultural areas into national communication networks. The standardization of mailbox design and placement became an important element in improving delivery efficiency. Standard mailboxes, positioned at standardized locations and heights, allowed mail carriers to work more quickly and safely. The familiar blue mailboxes of the United States Postal Service, the red pillar boxes of the British Royal Mail, and similar standardized collection boxes in other countries became iconic symbols of reliable postal service, while also serving important practical functions in mail collection and public identification of postal facilities. Postal transportation systems were revolutionized through the systematic application of scientific management principles and new transportation technologies. Railway mail service was refined through detailed studies of mail flows, train schedules, and processing requirements. Highway mail transportation was introduced as automobile technology developed, eventually supplementing and in some cases replacing railway service. The first experimental airmail services began in the early 20th century, pointing toward dramatic future improvements in long-distance mail transportation. The introduction of standardized mail classifications and rate structures represented an important step toward more rational postal pricing. Instead of complex rate schedules based on distance, weight, and various other factors, modernized postal systems developed simplified rate structures based on standardized service categories. First-class mail, second-class mail, third-class mail, and other service categories allowed customers to choose appropriate service levels while enabling postal administrators to manage different types of mail more efficiently. Postal banking services, introduced in many countries during this period, extended postal facilities into financial services that were particularly valuable in rural areas and working-class communities that were underserved by traditional banks. Postal savings banks, money order services, and postal insurance programs provided secure, convenient financial services through the extensive network of post offices that reached into every community. These services not only generated additional revenue for postal systems, but also served important social functions by providing financial services to populations that might otherwise lack access to banking. International postal cooperation reached new levels of sophistication during this period with the establishment of the Universal Postal Union in 1874. This international organization created standardized procedures for handling international mail, established uniform rates for international postal service, and provided mechanisms for resolving disputes between national postal systems. The UPU represented one of the earliest examples of systematic international cooperation on a global scale, establishing precedents that would influence the development of other international organizations. The scientific study of postal operations emerged as postal administrators sought to optimize efficiency and reduce costs while handling ever-increasing mail volumes. Time and motion studies analyzed the work patterns of postal employees to identify opportunities for improvement. Statistical analysis of mail flows helped administrators plan facility locations and staffing levels. Operations research techniques, borrowed from industrial engineering, were applied to postal routing problems, facility design, and resource allocation decisions. Postal employee relations became increasingly complex as postal workforces grew larger and more specialized. The formation of postal worker unions reflected both the growing political consciousness of working people and the specific challenges faced by postal employees. Postal work required high levels of skill and reliability, but often involved repetitive tasks performed under considerable time pressure. Labor negotiations in the postal sector established important precedents for public employee relations and helped establish professional standards for postal employment. Training programs for postal employees became more systematic and comprehensive as job requirements became more complex. New postal workers needed training not only in basic mail handling procedures, but also in the operation of mechanical equipment, customer service techniques, and safety procedures. Advanced training programs prepared postal supervisors and administrators for management responsibilities. Professional development opportunities helped retain experienced employees and maintain high service standards. Quality control systems were introduced to monitor postal service performance and identify areas requiring improvement. Statistical sampling techniques allowed postal administrators to measure delivery times, accuracy rates, and customer satisfaction levels systematically. Performance standards were established for different types of service, and regular monitoring helped ensure that these standards were being met. Customer complaint systems provided feedback that could be used to improve service quality and operational efficiency. The integration of postal service with other communication and transportation systems became increasingly important as the economy became more complex and interconnected. Coordination with railway systems, telegraph companies, and shipping lines required careful scheduling and systematic information sharing. The development of intermodal transportation systems allowed mail to move seamlessly between different types of carriers, improving both speed and reliability of service. Urban mail delivery systems were completely reorganized during this period to cope with rapidly growing and increasingly complex urban areas. The traditional system of requiring customers to collect their mail at post offices was gradually replaced by regular home delivery service. This change required the establishment of thousands of new delivery routes, the hiring and training of letter carriers, and the development of systematic methods for organizing urban addresses and delivery schedules. The introduction of special delivery services provided customers with faster mail delivery options for urgent correspondence. These express services, typically available for an additional fee, used dedicated messengers and priority handling to ensure rapid delivery. Special delivery services served important commercial and personal needs while also generating additional revenue for postal systems. Postal fraud prevention became a more serious concern as mail volumes increased and postal services became more central to commercial activities. The development of sophisticated security features for postal money orders, the establishment of postal inspection services to investigate mail theft and fraud, and the creation of legal penalties for postal crimes all reflected the growing importance of postal security. Postal inspectors became skilled investigators who worked closely with other law enforcement agencies to combat postal-related crimes. The mechanization of postmarking and cancellation processes improved both efficiency and security in mail handling. Mechanical postmarking machines could process mail much faster than manual methods, while also providing more consistent and legible date stamps. Cancellation machines that rendered postage stamps unusable helped prevent fraud while also speeding mail processing. These mechanical improvements were essential for handling the huge volumes of mail processed by modern postal systems. International mail exchange procedures were standardized and streamlined through the development of detailed agreements between national postal systems. Uniform addressing conventions, standardized customs procedures, and systematic methods for calculating international postage rates all contributed to more efficient international mail service. The establishment of international mail processing facilities at major ports and airports further improved the speed and reliability of international correspondence. The development of postal research and development programs reflected the growing recognition that systematic innovation was essential for continued improvement in postal service. Postal research laboratories investigated new technologies, tested innovative equipment, and developed improved operational procedures. Collaboration between postal administrations, universities, and private industry led to advances in mail processing technology, transportation systems, and service delivery methods. Customer service improvements during this period included extended post office hours, more convenient locations for postal facilities, and better information systems to help customers understand postal services and requirements. The introduction of postal guides, rate schedules, and informational materials helped customers use postal services more effectively. Customer service training for postal employees improved the quality of public interactions and enhanced the overall postal experience. The period of postal modernization established many of the operational principles and service standards that would characterize postal service throughout the 20th century. The emphasis on efficiency, standardization, and systematic improvement created postal systems that could handle enormous volumes of mail while maintaining reasonable levels of service quality. More importantly, this period demonstrated that traditional service industries could be transformed through the systematic application of new technology, scientific management principles, and innovative organizational methods. These innovations in postal service also established expectations for reliable, efficient public service that would influence the development of other government services. The success of postal modernization programs provided models for improving other public services and demonstrated that government operations could be both efficient and responsive to public needs. The postal service became, in many countries, a symbol of effective government and a source of national pride in public sector capability. The development of aviation in the early 20th century opened entirely new possibilities for postal service, promising to overcome the geographical barriers that had constrained mail transportation since the beginning of recorded history. The concept of airmail represented more than simply a faster method of moving letters from one place to another. It embodied humanity's age-old dream of conquering distance and time through technological innovation. The gradual establishment of airmail services would prove to be not just the next chapter in postal history, but the beginning of the modern era of global communications. The first experimental airmail flights took place in the early 1910s, as aviation pioneers and postal administrators began to explore the potential applications of the new flying machines. These early flights were largely symbolic, demonstrating the possibility of aerial mail transport rather than establishing practical service. The first official airmail flight in the United States took place on September 23, 1911, when pilot Earl Ovington carried a bag of mail from Nassau Boulevard to Mineola, Long Island, a distance of less than 6 miles that took barely 5 minutes to complete, yet represented a revolution in the concept of mail transportation. World War I dramatically accelerated the development of aviation technology and demonstrated the practical utility of aircraft for transportation and communication purposes. Military aviation services established regular mail flights between military installations, proving that aircraft could operate reliably under challenging conditions and maintain regular schedules over substantial distances. The war also trained thousands of pilots and mechanics who would later apply their skills to civilian aviation and airmail service. The establishment of regular airmail service required overcoming enormous technical, logistical, and economic challenges that made the early days of aviation among the most heroic periods in transportation history. Early airmail pilots flew in open cockpits without reliable navigation instruments, weather forecasting services, or emergency landing facilities. They navigated by following railroad tracks and highways, landed in farmers' fields when mechanical problems developed, and often risked their lives to maintain mail schedules that promised delivery times impossible with surface transportation. The United States Post Office pioneered systematic airmail operations with the inauguration of regular service between Washington, D.C. and New York City in May 1918. This service used military pilots flying war surplus aircraft over a route that could be completed in less than 4 hours compared to overnight train service that required 8 to 10 hours. The success of this initial service led to rapid expansion, with transcontinental airmail service established by 1920, connecting New York and San Francisco with a flying time of approximately 30 hours, including stops for refueling and mail exchange. European airmail development followed similar patterns, but was complicated by the continent's complex geography and political boundaries. The first regular international airmail service began between London and Paris in 1919, operated by commercial airlines that carried both passengers and mail. German airmail services, despite restrictions imposed by post-war treaties, pioneered several important innovations in aircraft design and operational procedures that would influence airmail development throughout the world. The operational challenges of early airmail service were formidable. Aircraft of the 1920s had limited range, requiring frequent stops for refueling and maintenance. Weather conditions that barely affected surface transportation could make flying impossible or extremely dangerous. Navigation over unfamiliar territory was difficult and uncertain, particularly during night flights or in poor visibility conditions. Emergency landing facilities were rare, and aircraft that experienced mechanical problems often had to land in inappropriate locations, sometimes resulting in damage to both aircraft and mail cargo. The development of airmail infrastructure required massive investments in airports, navigation aids, weather reporting systems, and maintenance facilities. Landing fields had to be established at regular intervals along airmail routes, equipped with hangars for aircraft storage, workshops for maintenance and repairs, and facilities for fuel storage and mail handling. These early airports were often simple grass fields with minimal buildings, but they represented the beginning of the aviation infrastructure that would eventually span the globe. Night flying capabilities were essential for competitive airmail service, as aircraft that could operate only during daylight hours could not match the speed advantages that made airmail economically viable. The development of lighted airway series of beacon lights that marked airmail routes allowed pilots to navigate safely during darkness. These beacon systems, first established along major airmail routes in the United States during the mid-1920s, required thousands of light installations maintained by dedicated crews who ensured that the lights operated reliably every night of the year. Weather forecasting services became crucial elements in airmail operations, as pilots needed accurate, timely information about conditions along their routes to make decisions about takeoffs, route selection, and emergency procedures. The development of aviation weather services contributed significantly to meteorological science, and established many of the weather reporting procedures that remain essential for aviation operations today. Radio communication between aircraft and ground stations allowed for real-time updates on weather conditions and operational requirements. The economics of early airmail service required careful balancing of costs and revenues that challenged both postal administrators and airline operators. Aircraft were expensive to purchase and maintain, fuel costs were substantial, and the specialized personnel required for airmail operations commanded high salaries. Yet airmail service had to be priced competitively with surface mail to attract sufficient volume to make operations economically viable. Government subsidies were often essential during the early years of airmail development, as the high costs of establishing service could not be recovered through postal revenues alone. International airmail service required unprecedented cooperation between national governments, postal administrations, and aviation authorities. Aircraft flying international routes needed permission to cross national boundaries, land at foreign airports, and carry mail between different postal systems. The development of international aviation law, air traffic control procedures, and standardized safety regulations all emerge from the practical requirements of international airmail operations. The impact of airmail on business communications was immediate and dramatic. Commercial correspondence that previously required days or weeks to travel between distant cities could now be delivered overnight or within a few days. This acceleration in business communications contributed to the development of national and international markets, enabled more rapid decision-making in commercial operations, and made possible new forms of business organization that depended on fast, reliable communication between distant locations. Personal correspondence also benefited significantly from airmail service, although the high costs of airmail postage meant that many individuals used airmail only for urgent communications. Family members separated by great distances could maintain much closer relationships when they could exchange letters within days rather than weeks. Emergency communications, news of illness, death, or other urgent family matters could be transmitted much more quickly through airmail service. The technological development of aircraft specifically designed for mail transport led to significant advances in aviation engineering. Mail planes needed to be reliable, fuel efficient, and capable of carrying substantial loads over long distances. The requirements of airmail operations contributed to improvements in aircraft engines, navigation instruments, radio equipment, and safety systems that benefited all aspects of aviation development. The integration of airmail with surface transportation systems created intermodal mail networks that combined the speed of aviation with the comprehensive coverage of traditional postal systems. Mail collected throughout regional areas could be transported by surface means to major airports, then flown rapidly to distant cities, where it was again distributed through local postal networks. This integration allowed airmail service to extend its benefits to communities that were not directly served by aviation, while maintaining the economic efficiency necessary for viable operations. The cultural impact of airmail extended far beyond its practical benefits for mail delivery. Aviation captured public imagination in ways that earlier transportation improvements had not, representing humanity's conquest of the final frontier of surface transportation. Airmail pilots became popular heroes, celebrated in newspapers, magazines, and popular entertainment for their courage, skill, and dedication to maintaining mail schedules regardless of weather conditions or mechanical difficulties. The establishment of transcontinental and transoceanic airmail services created the first truly global communication networks that could connect any two points on Earth within a matter of days rather than weeks or months. The inauguration of transatlantic airmail service in the 1930s reduced the time required for correspondence between Europe and America from a week or more to less than 2 days. Similar improvements in Trans-Pacific service connected Asia with America and Europe in ways that had never before been possible. By the end of the 1930s, airmail had established itself as an essential element of global communications, providing the speed and reliability that business, government, and personal communications increasingly required. The infrastructure developed for airmail operations, airports, navigation systems, weather services, and international agreements would provide the foundation for the enormous expansion of aviation during and after World War II. More importantly, airmail had demonstrated that technological innovation could continue to compress time and space in ways that would fundamentally alter human relationships and social organization. The success of airmail encouraged continued research and development in communication technologies, ultimately leading to the electronic communication systems that would characterize the latter half of the 20th century. The age of airmail had proven that the ancient human dream of instant communication across any distance was not merely possible, but inevitable, setting the stage for the communication revolution that would transform the modern world. As we reach the end of our gentle journey through the history of postal systems, we find ourselves at the threshold of the modern world, where the patient evolution of millennia has given way to the rapid transformations of our digital age. Yet the story we have traced together from ancient Persian riders galloping across empire roads to pioneering aviators carrying mail bags through uncertain skies reveals constant themes that connect the earliest human communications with our contemporary global networks. The development of postal systems represents one of humanity's most persistent and successful efforts to overcome the fundamental challenges of distance and time that have always separated human communities. Each innovation we have explored the relay stations of ancient Persia, the systematic efficiency of Roman roads, the patient dedication of medieval monks, the entrepreneurial energy of coaching companies, the mechanical precision of railway mail, and the technological daring of early aviators has contributed to the gradual construction of networks that bind our world together. What emerges most clearly from this long history is the understanding that effective communication systems require not just technological innovation, but patient institutional development, careful attention to operational details, and the dedicated service of countless individuals whose quiet competence makes possible the connections that we often take for granted. The postal clerk sorting letters by lamplight, the mail guard protecting correspondence through dangerous territory, the railway mail clerks working efficiently in swaying cars, the aviators risking their lives to maintain impossible schedules all represent the human element that transforms technological possibility into reliable service. The story of postal development also reveals how communication improvements have consistently exceeded the expectations of those who pioneered them. The Persian postal riders who established the first systematic networks could hardly have imagined global mail delivery. The Roman engineers who built their cursus publicus could not have anticipated steam locomotives carrying sorted mail at unprecedented speeds. The railway mail clerks of the 19th century would have been amazed by aircraft crossing oceans with correspondence that would have taken months to deliver by surface routes. This pattern suggests that our contemporary communication revolution, remarkable as it seems to us, represents simply the latest chapter in humanity's ongoing effort to connect across space and time. The internet, satellite communications, and mobile networks that characterize our current era are the natural successors to the postal networks we have explored, serving the same fundamental human needs for connection, information sharing, and coordination across distances. The institutional lessons embedded in postal history remain relevant for understanding contemporary communication challenges, the importance of reliable infrastructure, the need for standardized procedures, the value of international cooperation, The necessity of adapting to changing technology while maintaining service continuity, all of these principles that postal systems developed over centuries continue to influence how we organize and operate modern communication networks. Perhaps most importantly, the history of postal systems demonstrates that effective communication is not merely a technical achievement, but a social and cultural accomplishment that requires sustained commitment from entire societies. The postal networks that connected ancient empires, medieval Europe, and the modern world succeeded not just because of technological capabilities, but because communities recognized communication as essential to their survival and prosperity, and were willing to invest the resources and effort necessary to maintain reliable service. As we settle into rest, carried along by this gentle exploration of human connection across time, we might reflect on how the quiet revolution of postal service has shaped the world we inhabit. Every letter that found its way across dangerous roads, every message that traveled by ship across stormy oceans, every innovation that reduced delivery time by hours or days, has contributed to the creation of our interconnected global civilization. The postal systems we have explored establish the expectation that distance need not prevent communication, that reliable networks could connect any two points on Earth, and that technological innovation could continue to improve the speed, reliability, and accessibility of human connection. These expectations, first nurtured by ancient postal riders and gradually fulfilled by generations of postal workers, engineers, and administrators, have created a foundation for our contemporary understanding of what communication can and should accomplish. Tonight, as we conclude this journey through the quiet corridors of postal history, we can appreciate how the patient accumulation of knowledge, technology, and institutional capability has created the communication networks that support our modern world. The next time we send a message across the globe in seconds, or receive information from distant places almost instantaneously, we might remember the postal riders who began this long journey, carrying their messages across ancient landscapes at the steady pace of walking horses, believing that human connection was worth whatever effort it required. The story of postal systems reminds us that the most profound changes in human history often occur not through dramatic revolutions, but through the patient accumulation of small improvements, sustained over long periods by people who understood that their quiet work was contributing to something larger than themselves. In this way, the history of postal service becomes not just a story about mail delivery, but a meditation on how human societies gradually overcome the barriers that separate us, creating networks of connection that make possible the complex, interdependent world we share today. Rest well, knowing that you are part of this continuing story of human connection, this endless journey toward bringing distant hearts and minds closer together, this ancient dream of communication that spans any distance and overcomes any barrier, carried forward by each generation in its own way, at its own pace, with its own innovations, but always serving the same fundamental human need to reach across space and time to touch the lives of others.